Tavius Robinson, a senior defensive lineman from Gulf, Ontario, Canada, came and joined the Ole Miss football program a season ago. He's now in his second year with the Rebels. Tavius, I'm always amazed, and it's going to be your job to make sure that we're not saying anything stupid or just ignorant about Canada, because I'm always amazed at how much more Canadians know about America than we do about you guys. And I was at your first media op, and it just felt like every question was like, are we really asking Tavius questions like in this nature or whatever? But are you surprised at how little, when you got here, the Americans knew about anything about Canada?
Oh, I wouldn't say I was surprised necessarily. No, I mean, that's kind of what I was expecting, but no, it's all good though.
Yeah, how much did you know about American history, culture, this, that, and the other whenever you chose to move south?
A good amount, but not a whole lot. I haven't even really been this south before. This is like my first time ever coming this far. So, I've only really ever been to Florida in the States. So it definitely was a big difference.
So I got my initial experience of Canada. A group of guys, buddies, we went on a golf trip to north of Halifax. So on the very eastern side of Canada, we were in Nova Scotia area, and we were driving up. We flew into Halifax, and there's a university there. And then as we were driving up, there was another university in a little town that we stopped in, and you didn't see, like, you stop at a university in the States for the most part, especially in the South, you see these like cathedrals and all these facilities and things like that. It was more about the experience, or the learning more than about the sports, which is good, certainly a good thing. But when you came into, you just said you haven't been this far south. What was your kind of initial thoughts when you got to Mississippi? I'm sure there's a stigmatism of Mississippi. I've grown up here my whole life, and anytime I go anywhere else, people are like, "Oh, you're from Mississippi," and then you have to explain, like, I'm from Oxford. Yeah. It's different. Yeah. But what was your initial kind of thoughts of Mississippi when you got here?
There was a couple things. First, the accents really got me when I first got here. Like, I was constantly saying what, like, pardon me, like I couldn't understand anybody. But now I'm with it now. Like, I can understand everything. But that, and then I had got here last year just in August, early August. So the dead of the heat hit me different too. Like, it was a heat that I had just never felt before. So I'm used to that too now. But when I first got here, it was definitely a big shock for me.
So you had to do some kind of recruiting and scouting and things like that during a really odd time in the history of the world, right? So we're in a pandemic, and things are happening, and people don't know what the next step is. What was that transition like, of trying to get all of that figured out during a global pandemic?
It was definitely really hard. The process itself took a really long time. So I didn't have a lot of time to do research and like make my decision. So it was kind of like I had like a week period where I had to just figure out what was going to be best for me, and then just kind of pack up and go is how it went for me. So it was a really quick process for sure.
So super talented football player. When did you start playing football? And were like youth leagues a thing when you were a kid, or was it more like, okay, I'm getting into high school or junior high, I'm going to start playing football, that's going to be kind of my primary sport? When did you when was your first, like, okay, I love this, let's do this?
I started playing at a young age. I think I was either 8 or 9, so it was like youth city football. So I started off on the O-line because I was a lot bigger and taller than everyone, and then slowly moved to linebacker, and then outside linebacker, and then I was just strictly defense from there.
Nice.
And then into high school and so on and so forth. So yeah, definitely.
I heard the outside linebacker too there. We got the full Canadian experience.
The ignorance is coming out here. So any hockey? What else? What did you play hockey? I know that's a big part of the Canadian culture, especially in Ontario.
No, it definitely is a big part of it. But no, I never played hockey. I played baseball for a year, and I played soccer when I was really, really young, like 4 or 5. But other than that, it was just strictly football for me.
6'7", no basketball?
No, I didn't play basketball until high school. So that was, as soon as I got into football, like I knew, like I loved football. So it was just football from there.
When did you have your growth spurt? Like, how tall were you as a freshman compared to where you are now?
I was tall as a freshman in high school. I think I was at least 6'5".
Okay.
6'5", 6'6". So I grew pretty tall pretty quick. So
I mean, I think you're a hell of an edge guy, but I can't imagine if you would have gotten a basketball in your hands a little sooner, that might have been that might have been a better option for you. Who knows? So as an SEC level defensive lineman in Canada, where a smaller portion of or percentage of players are being recruited to go play college football, was it a man amongst boys at that high school level for you?
Sorry, you mean at the high school level, like where I was playing at?
For
Yeah.
you, yes.
It definitely, there's definitely a lot of good competition there, but yeah, I definitely stood out. I was bigger, a lot bigger than everyone. So even at my freshman year of high school, like I was a bigger kid. So it was I definitely stood out. Yeah.
But you have said in previous interviews, you probably could have been recruited to come play in the United States fresh out of high school. But you just didn't seek it out. So what was that process like? How much do you think that your 2 years at Gulf furthered your resume to be able to become an SEC defensive lineman?
Yeah, I think Guelph played a really big part in that. Yeah, coming out of high school, like the biggest thing is there's just not a lot of like good quality film and stuff that you get from the high school there. It's starting to get better now, but like it was just, and then obviously a lot of recruiters don't come up north. So it's like, it was hard to kind of get my tape out. So I was just being recruited by Canadian schools. And then Guelph was my home city town. So they were recruiting me since grade 9. So I ended up going there. And then when I got there, that's really when I started taking big strides, like right my first year there. Just, getting better every day. And then that led up to getting canceled and me just wanting more. So that's how I got this opportunity. So
just shows you how kind he is. I've been saying Golf and it's Guelph this entire interview, and he's looking out for me. And I should have been the pro and asked him going into this. And again, how little we know. I should have just kept it at Ontario. But I do want to point this out, Brandon, because this is my favorite fact so far. So the conference season that was canceled that Tavius is talking about is from the Ontario University Athletics. So the group of schools there, and these are the names of the nicknames in that conference, and they are way more creative at naming their sports teams than we are. He was a Guelph Griffin, right? Okay, unbelievable. Other nicknames: the Thunderbirds, the Thunder Wolves, Voyagers, Marauders, Ridgebacks, Gigi's, Excalibur, and the Varsity Blues. There's some boring ones here, like the Eagles and Lions and Tigers, and you guys get to,
we're simple animals is what we go with.
Okay, so you talked about your recruiting process from the Canadian schools. What was that like, and what was it for you that you said, I'm staying at home and playing for Guelph?
I think it's similar to the process here. The recruiters come out to the games, they watch the games, and then they talk to you, tell you about the program and all that stuff. And for me, Guelph was at me at a very like young age. Like at grade 9, they had me coming out to their training camps just to watch and like help set up bags here and stuff like that. So at a young age, they had me showing how the process was and like how they did things there. So for me, it was just a no-brainer to stay in my city, and that's also where my uncle played. So it was just I just stayed hometown, and then it worked out well. So
coming out of that, how familiar were you with NCAA football as a whole? And one of the surprising things to me, and this is again naiveness or maybe even stupidity, but when we were there, every time we would want to watch something, like we could find Canadian football easy. Like there was usually a game on when we were there, and you could find a few other things, but it just didn't seem, the media presence certainly is not there as it is in the States with any kind of sporting event with ESPN and all that kind of stuff. So how familiar were you with NCAA football, college football, and how much were you able to kind of watch and, American football games growing up?
It's definitely a big presence, but like you said, it's not on all the media. So you kind of have to search for it. But, I always watched the NFL, and like same with the NCAA. Like the NCAA was something that like I looked up to. Like you'd get together with friends to watch the NCAA championship and stuff like that. So it was always like a big event for me to watch it on TV. And then it was just crazy how like in a matter of months that I went from watching it, and then all of a sudden I'm here. So it was pretty crazy.
Were you an SEC guy, or were you Big Ten? You're closer to the northern schools. Were you like a Big Ten Pac-12 guy?
Kind of just, Big Ten, SEC. I didn't really know the differences with all of them as much as I do now, but Big Ten.
And now you know the best conference, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, when you first, obviously there was a process of going back and forth. What were your initial talks with Ole Miss like, and I mean, I'm assuming you came sight unseen of Oxford. Did you come in for a visit, or did they show you a virtual recruiting video? They're like, hey, here's what it's like. Good luck.
Yeah,
So
it was kind of just
what was that process like?
it was kind of just a virtual video, and then going over the defensive scheme and stuff and how I would fit into it, and then my living situation, academics, all that type of stuff. So, but like I said, it was a really quick process. Like there wasn't a lot of time to make the decision because like the process took so long. I got here like 3 or 4 days before camp, so it was cutting it tight. But yeah, everything was pretty much virtual, and then I liked what the coaches were saying, so that's how I ended up here.
So you get to campus, you go through, you go through your fall piece, and then you take the field against Florida, one of the top programs in the SEC, for an all SEC schedule for your first season of American college football. What was the adjustment? I mean, I have to think, and we've had guys on here and we've asked the question like, harder going from high school to college or college to pros and those kind of questions. But what was the adjustment like to where you didn't get the, no offense to Austin P, but you didn't get an Austin P or a Tulane. I mean, you start with, one of the best teams in the East year in and year out coming to your place, and you got to just kind of get thrown out there and figure it out. What was that adjustment like?
The adjustment was definitely big, but I think training camp definitely helped me kind of get used to it before the first game. But and another thing was even at 25% like capacity of fans, like that was a big difference too for me. Like I thought that like last year game were loud. Now like this year's even louder. But like the speed of the game and just like having 11 players versus 12, like it creates different, like the ways offense run their schemes is different. So just the way you play certain blocks and stuff was different, but a lot of the techniques were the same from what I was doing in Canada. So it just took a couple of weeks of training camp, and I think I got it pretty quickly, adjusted to it.
So from 2020 to 2021, obviously 2020, I'm sure you learned a ton as you finished out the season. We go to the bowl game. What were the things that you feel like you needed to do in the off season to get better and to make the adjustments to be even that much better for 21?
There was a couple of things that I really worked on this off season. First of all, just my overall strength, and because I'm more of a light edge defender. So one thing I kind of struggled with was having the strength to take on double teams, and like I was a little bit underweight, so I gained some weight and strength. With a full summer off season program here was great, helped me with that. And then another thing that I've been working on is pad level. Being tall, it's right. You got to focus on staying down, staying low. And then just, overall speed and just being able to work different pass rush moves. So those are all the biggest things that I worked on in the off season and still am continuing to work on. So
I think you're underselling it, man. I mean, what you came back looking like this season, you and Wilson Love and his team must have been best friends during this offseason. What was it like? What is it like working with his team and the strength coaches here as they try to get all of the players, whether they're coming from your level in Canada or from high school or junior college, they're preparing everybody for the same goal, which is to become an SEC champ?
It's great. I mean, it's intense and it's hard work, but like, I loved it. I mean, you could see the results happening as you were doing it. So, every week you would be lifting more weight and getting the numbers would be faster. You could jump further. And like by like my starting numbers to my end numbers it was a crazy difference. And that was just from, the one off season there. So I loved the process, and it was good. Yeah.
You talked about having a full off season, but for you really didn't. And if you look back to last year, you're moving to a new country during a pandemic. And this year you start camp with an injury, and now it feels like you're getting back to full strength. I mean, I saw you this week coming off the edge as fast as you had at the end of last season. It has to be a little bit frustrating because you're probably thinking, just give me one normal off season to put it all together. But how does it feel coming back from that and pushing back to 100%?
I haven't had a lot of adversity in my life with injuries. This is kind of my first, it wasn't even a major injury, but my first setback injury. So, I think it was something that I needed to kind of realize that, you can't take days for advantage, So now that I'm coming back from it, I try to, not take it for granted, and just every day coming with the mindset that I have to get better every day, because, the game can be taken from you. So you have to give it your all every day you have. So.
I will say, Brandon, I did laugh. He was asked about his injury at a press conference, and he described it as a lower body injury. With if there's nothing that's you never played hockey, that's the hockey description for an injury right there. I love that.
Very much so. So talking pro prospects, NFL, CFL, did you have a team growing up and somebody you cheered for is like, okay, this is, Sundays or whatever day, this is the team that I'm rooting for. And in America, we always had the starter jackets, right? That was our thing, like your team starter jacket on the back with a real giant logo, looking like you're a ball boy on the field.
Brandon's much older than I am.
Yeah, sorry. Who was your team growing up, and did you have a team in either league?
In the NFL, it was the Steelers, and then in the CFL, it was Saskatchewan. But yeah, so I'm still a Steelers fan, but now I'm kind of more of like I look at players more than teams now, but still a Steelers fan though, for sure. I see the terrible talent back there. Yeah.
Nice. And for you, what would it mean to get an opportunity in either league, really?
Everything, that's what I'm working towards, and just, when I get the opportunity, I'm going to make the most of it. And, that's my goal. So that's what I work towards every day, for sure.
I have actually picked a team in the CFL. I think it's fun. It's like a non-disrespectfully. I went to school in the MAC, and it's like, let's remember some guys of the MAC, and they're playing there and competing at a high level. I'm actually, because of the black and gold, I have picked Hamilton. The Ticats are my team. So I've enjoyed watching them from time to time. But Tavius mentioned it, but his uncle Junior Robinson played defensive back for 10 seasons in the CFL. Another one of his teammates here in Oxford, Dean Leonard, was drafted by the Ticats in last year's CFL draft. And in fact, we added another Canadian to the roster this year, and Jaden Dix. I mean, there's got to be some comfortability, you guys have more in common than maybe someone from Mississippi would, and you have each other here as you grow into becoming SEC stars.
For sure. Yeah, no, and me and Dean are roommates, and we were roommates when we both first got here. So that was definitely helpful, for sure.
Well, this has been great, Tavius. I mean, we're so excited to see what you're continuing to do when you get a full off season and you figure it all out. All the pieces are there. And I like I said, I saw it. I kept my eye on you on some specific plays just last week. And it's like, man, this kid's getting it. And it's going to be special to see where you get to when you put it all together. Best of luck rest of the season. Again, appreciate your time here today.
For sure. Thank you guys very much.